Erev Tov, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Thursday night Parashat HaShavua class. Tonight we are studying Parashat Bo. The words of Torah we're going to say this evening are sponsored and dedicated by Mr. and Mrs. Sam and Elvi Cohen and family in memory of his father, Isaac Cohen, Zichrono Livracha, as well as my dear parents, Mark and Judy Kadosh, in memory of my grandfather, Menaseh ben Zaken Zichrono Livracha, Ti Nafsham Tzura B'Sorah Hayim. The words of Torah and inspiration we're going to say tonight to be Lui Neshamot and bring lots of zechuyot and protection for Klal Yisrael. Amen. Parashat Bo, without a doubt, is one of the most famous parashiot in the entire Torah. It is the episode that deals with Yetziat Mitzrayim, the last three of the 10 Makot, probably culminating with the most famous one of Makat Bechorot. And of course, the whole story of Pesach, Yetziat Mitzrayim, our entire religion is founded upon this idea of the Yetziat Mitzrayim. Our emunah is embedded from this episode where we were on the 49th level of Tumah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out, and that is why we recollect this once a year in detail, and for every mitzvah, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, so no question, it's a special parasha. However, I want to speak about an idea found in the parasha that often gets overlooked. It is fitting that we examine tonight a command that is issued by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe Rabbeinu, something that we read it, okay, nice, but we don't focus on it a lot. And the command comes in the 11th chapter, Perak Yud Aleph, Pasuk Bet, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Moshe Rabbeinu as follows: Daber na be'oznei ha'am, speak in the ears of the people, ve'ishalu ish me'et re'ehu ve'isha me'et re'uta, kelechesef uchlezahav. Let each man request of his fellow, and each woman from her fellow, silver vessels and gold vessels. Where the men and women of Bnei Israel were to go to their Egyptian fellows and request gold and silver to take on their departure with them as they departed the land. And these items, gold, silver, smalot, as well as clothing, was never to be returned. In truth, this divine directive was already mentioned by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe Rabbeinu by the burning bush in Parashat Shemot. There it says, "V'natati etchen ha'am hazeh be'enei Mitzrayim, ve'haya ki telechun lo telechu rekam." I shall grant favor, I grant these people favor in the eyes of Mitzrayim, and when you go, you're not going to leave empty. V'sha'ala isha mishechenta migarat beita. Each woman shall request from her neighbor and the one who lives near her house silver vessels, golden vessels. So we see that this has already been commanded. The Radak, one of the great commentators, he says that the word v'sha'ala, isha mishechenta, implies borrowing. We say lish'ol means to borrow, lehash'il means to lend. And therefore they requested the vessels with the intent of returning the vessels, says the Radak. And on this, many of the Chachamim are perplexed by this command of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu represents ultimate truth, emet. Chotamo emet. His seal is true. So how could he direct Am Yisrael that each man, v'ishalu ish met re'ehu, v'isha met re'uta, each man requests of his fellow, each woman from her fellow, when they had no intention of returning the silver and gold vessels? After all, the Torah tells us, Ki asher eitem et Mitzrayim hayom, lo tosifu lirotam od ad olam, that you shall not see Egypt ever again once you leave the country. On this, there are a lot of answers. For one, the Abraham Ibn Ezra writes that, and he admits that there are people that contend and complain that our forefathers were thieves, that they called them ganavim. But he says that these people will ultimately realize that a great mitzvah was performed at that moment. It's unnecessary to ask why, and he explains, seeing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything. He grants wealth to whom he desires to be wealthy. And then he takes from him, and then he gives to other people. This is not wrong. Everything belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it appears to, because of this difficulty in the scripture, many of the Rishonim chose to interpret the verb ve'ishalu and ve'sha'ala not as borrowing items, but requesting items. Rabbeinu Bechaye in his commentary writes, this is not a borrowing as applies to vessels, which implies borrowing in order to return. But rather he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded that they request from them as gifts. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu will grant them favor in the eyes of the Egyptians so that they would give him the gifts. Matanot, here for you to leave. A similar interpretation is actually found in the Rashbam. He writes that the word Veishalu also means a gift or request. She'al mimeni ve'etena, David HaMelech writes, She'al mimeni ve'etena goim nachalatecha, request of me and I will make the nations your inheritance. And he interprets that pasuk based from that pasuk that in essence it's a gift that the Egyptians are giving. The Jews requested a gift and the Egyptians gave a gift. The rabbis want to say as follows. The problem is that there's another pasuk that doesn't fit well with this. The pasuk writes, "Vayashem natan etchen ha'am be'enei Mitzrayim vayashilum." When the Torah describes the Egyptians giving the items to the Jews, the verb that's used is vayashilum. So even if you interpret the first word vayishalu as a form of request and not borrowing, the word vayashilum cannot be interpreted that way. It suggests that the Egyptians lent them the items as requested. So the Rashbam, who sees this difficulty, realizes, okay, maybe they were the ones requesting, and the Egyptians were the ones granting the requests. So you have to change the verb as well. This is all nice. Okay, so we call it a little bit of a dochak answer. We call it in the lashon of the yeshiva terms, a dochak answer. Basically, we're saying we're changing the meaning of vayishalu from which normally means borrowing to requesting, vayashilum, which normally means they lent them, to now, no, they granted them the gifts. Why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu use a simple term? Why couldn't he just say vayvakshu, vayvakesh? Levakesh means to request. If indeed that's what the Jews wanted, they wanted to request gifts, so use that term. The meaning would have been very clear. The term would not have been ambiguous. They were not borrowing the items, they were requesting the items. And then no one would have these doubts. No one would accuse our forefathers of being thieves. It would have been a lot simpler to do something like that. In addition, we need to address another terminology that seems to be problematic. The pasuk says, "Veishalu ish me'et ra'ehu." Let each man borrow from his fellow, each woman from her fellow. The Egyptians are fellows? The Egyptians are friends? Since when are the Egyptians friends? These are people that made us suffer for over 2 centuries of some of the worst slavery imaginable. How is the Torah referring them to Re'ehu? We say, Ve'ahavta le're'acha kamocha. Love your friend like yourself. It's the same word. It's the same noun. So what is the meaning of fellows here? Why are we referencing the Egyptians as fellows? It's odd that we would refer to non-Jewish Egyptians as fellows. In fact, whenever we see the term, the other mitzvot in the Torah that use re'echa, kitavo bekerem re'echa, when you go to the vineyard of your fellow, the Gemara very clearly says it's your fellow, the Jew, velo kerem goy. It's not the vineyard of a non-Jew. So what's happening here? Why refer the Egyptians as fellows? There's an absolutely amazing chidush, an explanation brought by Rabbeinu Bechaye. He writes that prior to the giving of the Torah, all human beings were friends. They were one people. After Matan Torah, after the Jews received the Torah, after HaKadosh Baruch Hu offered the Torah to every nation, and they all refused it except for Israel, and we're going to get back to this, the other nations were now excluded from the category of brothers and friends. No longer are they considered acquaintances and fellows of the Jewish people. Now, the term Re'echa only applies to Israel. Jew among Jew, friends, brothers. Like the David HaMelech writes in Tehillim, Leman achai vereai, for the sake of my brothers and my fellows, in reference to Am Yisrael after they received the Torah. It should be very clear to every intelligent person that this still requires a little bit of clarification. Why did God still choose to refer to the Egyptians as fellows, which suggests some sort of kinship or friendship among human beings prior to Matan Torah? In addition, we have to try to reconcile the very peculiar language employed in the Pasuk. Usually, HaKadosh Baruch Hu instructs Moshe, Daber el Bnei Israel. Right? Vayomer Hashem el Moshe lemor, Daber el Bnei Israel. Speak to the Jewish people. Here, God doesn't say that. In the instruction to have the Jews request items from their fellows and women from their fellows, it says, Daber na be'ozne ha'am. Please speak in the ears of the people. This implies that Moshe Rabbeinu was going to reveal some sort of secret from above that was meant only for their ears. So what indeed was this secret inherent in God's command of let each man request from his fellow and let each woman request from her fellow? And again, why call them fellows? To begin, we have to note that HaKadosh Baruch Hu juxtaposed the directive to request gold and silver from the Egyptians to the prophecy delivered to Moshe Rabbeinu concerning Makat Bechorot, the death of the firstborn. While Moshe Rabbeinu was still in the presence of Paro, the Torah tells us in this week's parasha that God said to Moshe, Od nega echad avi al Paro, I'm going to bring one more plague on Paro, and then I'm going to send them out. Daber na be'ozneam. Please speak into the ears of the Jewish people, and they shall request from their fellows, and each woman shall request from her fellow, kele kesef zahav. And then it goes on to say, you should know, Vayomer Moshe, Ko amar Hashem, kachatzot halayla ani yotze betoch Mitzrayim. Moshe tells Paro, he's coming in the middle of the night and he's going to kill all the firstborns. Rashi comments that this nevuah, this prophecy, was said to him while he was actually standing in front of Paro. Because when Moshe Rabbeinu departed Paro after the second last plague, after the plague of Choshech, he never saw his face again. After Makat Choshech, the Torah tells us that Paro informed Moshe, Lech me'alai, get away from me, I don't want to see you again. Hisham elecha al tosef reot penei ki beyom rotcha panai tamut. Paro tells Moshe Rabbeinu, the next time that I see you, I'm going to kill you. You're dead. You're finished. Vayomer Moshe ken dibarta. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Paro, you're saying great. Lo asif od reot panecha. You're never going to see me again. Which means that the directive, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is directing Moshe Rabbeinu to warn Paro of Makat Bechorot before he left at that time. And at that same moment, he is also directing Moshe to tell Am Yisrael to request these items. So let's just recap where we are right now. These very important Pesukim. While Moshe Rabbeinu is still standing in front of Paro, God informs Moshe that Od nega achad avi al Paro, I'm going to bring one more plague. That's referring to Makat Bechorot. Then God gives him the directive that each man should request from his fellow and each woman request from her fellow gold and silver vessels. Then Moshe Rabbeinu, before leaving Paro, warns him of the impending plague of Ani yotze betoch Mitzrayim kachatzot halayla, that God is going to come and strike the firstborns in the middle of the night. So we have to explain, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu combine the command of please speak to the ears of the Jewish people to request the gold and silver vessels from their fellow to the impending Makat Bechorot? What's the connection? Why didn't God wait for Moshe Rabbeinu to leave Paro's palace and issue the directive without any connection to Makat Bechorot? So we have a lot of questions. We have a lot of things floating in the air, as usual is with this Thursday night class. And with your permission, we're going to try to connect it all together and make sense of this entire mini episode that's taking place. There's a well-known question in the world of Dirash, brought down by the Bnei Yisachar, one of the great Chachamim of the last few centuries. In the name of the Chidah, he writes it. According to the Midrash, Yaakov and Esav, the two brothers, the twins, children of Yitzchak and Rivka, that of course didn't like each other. Yaakov and Esav divided the worlds between them. Esav took his portion of Olam Hazeh, here, this world, materialism, physicality, and Yaakov took his portion of Olam Haba, the next world, the world of spirituality, of Ruhniyut. That being the case, an obvious question arises. If this world belongs to Esav, how are we, Jews, Bnei Yaakov, Bnei Israel, allowed to benefit from the pleasures and the goods of this world beyond our basic means of necessities? Vadai, we have to survive, and we need to live, so we need a house and we need food. But to enjoy other pleasures belongs to Esav. Those are benefits that belong strictly to Esav, so how are Bnei Yaakov, like us, allowed to benefit from them? So the answer that is brought down by the Chidah stems from the pasuk that is quoted, or that is mentioned in Parashat Bereshit. And it's actually a Gemara, Masechet Avodah Zarah, that asks the question. The Gemara asks, why does the Torah write Vahi Erev, Vahi Boker, Yom HaShishi? And all the other days, it's Vahi Erev, Vahi Boker, Yom Sheni, Shelishi, Revi'i, without the prefix of the Hey. Why HaShishi when it comes to the sixth day? Famous question. And the Gemara says that it's reference to the sixth day, the 6th of Siman, which is the day that the Torah was given. HaKadosh Baruch Hu stipulated with the works of creation, and he said to them, if the Jewish people accept my Torah, then everything is great. But if they do not accept my Torah, then I'm going to return the world to tohu vavohu, to chaos and void. So according to this explanation of the Gemara, the world cannot continue to exist without Torah. In fact, the Torah writes in Parashat Zot HaBeracha, right at the end, Hashem miSinai ba v'zarach miSe'ir lamo, Hofia me'ar paran. Hashem came from Sinai, and he shone forth them to Se'ir, and he appeared to Har Paran. Se'ir and Paran. Who is Se'ir and Paran? Rashi says that God proposed to the children of Esav that they accept the Torah, and they didn't want to, because it said do not murder. And then he went to the children of Ishmael, and they didn't want to, because it said you cannot commit immorality. From the perspective of the other nations who refused to accept the Torah, the world should have returned to chaos. The world should have returned to tohu vavohu, complete void. They owe the continued existence of earth to the Jewish people. Because when the Jewish people accepted the Torah, they saved the world from annihilation. In fact, there's a remiss to this in a very famous law brought down in the Gemara, Masechet Baba Metzia, the 2nd chapter of Elu Metziot, that if someone saves an object from the bottom of the sea, Zuto Shel Yam, someone finds an object from the bottom of the sea, or a raging river came and swept him and lands in his property, the law is Harei Elu Shelo. He's allowed to keep that object because there's no way that the owner of the object will actually find it. He gave up hope, so therefore a person can keep it. The remez, the rabbis explain, by accepting the Torah, the Jewish people also acquired a portion of Olam Hazeh for themselves. They acquired a portion of this world for us, because it's tantamount to saving the entire world from certain loss. Like the bottom of the sea. The world was going to oblivion. It was going to be annihilated. It was at the bottom of the sea. There was nothing left because everybody else refused to keep the Torah. Yom HaShishi. Therefore, Yisrael are entitled to enjoy all the benefits of Olam Hazeh. That's why, by the way, there's a whole discussion in the Gemara with regards to the holiday of Shavuot. The holiday of Shavuot, the holiday that we celebrate Matan Torah. Should that holiday be completely devoted to God, meaning that there is no drinking and eating seudah, it should just strictly be the study of Torah, or should there be a physical element to it as well, like we do with all the other Yom Tovs? And there the Gemara concludes, according to everybody, there, it's also lachem. You also need to have the element of you, of the human being, of the physicality. And Rashi comments over there that the criterion of lachem, that a person rejoice with food and drink, demonstrating that the Jewish people, that Am Yisrael, are satisfied and content with this day on which a Torah is given. Because seeing that the Jewish people accepted the Torah on Har Sinai and thereby saved the world from extermination and annihilation, they acquired Olam Hazeh. They acquired a part of this world and the physicality that comes with it. They acquired Esav's portion based on the law of the bottom of the sea, Zuto Shel Yam. It was all but lost. Therefore, everybody concurs, everybody agrees that the holiday of Shavuot must be celebrated with an element of lachem, delighting in the pleasures of this world with food and drink and shir and merriness in the zechut of accepting the Torah. So now we can probably comprehend why HaKadosh Baruch Hu used the specific ambiguous term of ve'ishalu, which could be understood, like we started the class, in two different ways. With regards to the Egyptians, God meant for the Jews to request the expensive vessels as gifts. Why? To compensate for the slavery, to compensate for the servitude. 210 years we suffered, you're going to give us something back. In the eyes of the Egyptians, it was a gift, no question. But with regards to the Jews, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted them to recognize, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that all of the Egyptian property currently in their possession had a status of a loan. It had a status of borrowed items. The status of that property hinged on Bnei Israel accepting the Torah in the third month after Yetziat Mitzrayim on Vav Sivan. If they accepted the Torah, thereby saving the world from the bottom of the sea, saving the world from annihilation, it would remain in their possession as legitimate gifts. If, however, they did not accept the Torah, if they did not save the world from annihilation, they would be prohibited from utilizing the items. They would be prohibited from benefiting from the Egyptian property. They would have to return it because it would remain part of who? Esav's property. This is Esav's heritage. You have no right to touch it because you chose not to accept the Torah. And this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's directive to Moshe Rabbeinu beautifully. Daber na be'oznei ha'am. Please speak in the ears of the people, as if he was being instructed to whisper a secret in their ears. In truth, with regards to the Egyptians, they were asking and requesting them to gift the items to them. But to the Jews, in the eyes of Bnei Israel, they were being given a secret message. The items that you're receiving in the meantime were only loans, not true gifts. Until they accepted the Torah, until they saved the world from Zuto Shel Yam, the bottom of the sea. Now we can appreciate why HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically referred to the Egyptians as fellows. Like we said from Rabbeinu Bechaye, prior to Matan Torah, all human beings were friends. They were all like one. So like we learned, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to emphasize why he employed this ambiguous term of Vayishalu, which could either imply a loan or a gift. At that point in time, the Egyptian people was still categorized as a fellow of the Jew, because the Jew hadn't accepted the Torah yet. So they're fellows. And hence all the Egyptian property in their possession was still considered to be borrowed. However, the moment they would accept the Torah, those borrowed items would become theirs permanently. Absolute gifts. Hence the term Veishalu. Hence the phrase Daber na be'oznei ha'am. I'm going to whisper something in your ear because only you, Bnei Israel, should know what's at stake over here. Following this line of reasoning, we can now begin to explain why God juxtaposed the directive of Veishalu ish met re'ehu, that each man requests from his fellow gold and silver vessels, to the matter of Makat Bechorot. Earlier, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends Moshe to confront Paro, he's instructed to say, Ko Amar Hashem, God said, Beni Bechori Israel, my firstborn son Yisrael, and he's commanding you to send out my nation, Paro. If not, I'm going to kill your firstborn son. Rashi says, what is the meaning of God declaring that Bnei Israel were his firstborn? Rashi says a very cryptic comment that we're going to expand on. Rashi says, here God endorsed the sale of the birthright that Yaakov acquired from Esav. He endorsed it. He stamped his approval. In short, Makat Bechorot proves conclusively that God agreed to the sale of the birthright to Yaakov. Now, it's apparent that Yaakov Avinu was privileged to receive the brachot from his father Yitzchak due to the kedusha, the holiness of the birthright that he acquired from Esav. In fact, when Yitzchak gives Yaakov the blessing, and Esav gets upset, what does Esav say? Vayakeveni ze pa'amayim. He outwitted me twice. Et bechorati lakach, my firstborn rights he took. And now he took my blessing as well. Rashi also there in the quotes the Midrash that Yitzchak was trembling. Why was Yitzchak trembling? Why was he so afraid? So Yitzchak said to himself, maybe I committed a sin. Maybe I did something wrong by giving the blessing to the younger son instead of the older son. And maybe Esav was the one who deserved it. So then Esav screams out, Vayakiveni ze pa'amayim. He did this twice. Yitzchak looks at Esav, he says, he did what twice? He goes, yeah, he messed me over twice. He goes, I don't understand. What was the first time? What was there besides this? So he told him, he took my birthright. And when Yitzchak heard this, he says, this is why I was distressed. This is why I was trembling, because I was afraid I was oved, I transgressed the law. But now I realize that the blessing I gave to Yaakov, he was the legitimate firstborn. He should also be blessed. So we can say that Yitzchak also had no problem with this, of course. The connection between the selling of the firstborn to the receiving of the berachot, based on the pasuk, Vayomer Yaakov Michra Kayom et Bechoratecha Li. When Yaakov approaches Esav and he says, Esav, I want to buy your firstborn. I want to buy the rights to it. Sell it to me. And Rashi says, since a sacrificial service, the avodah that was supposed to be served by the Bechor, the firstborn, Yaakov said, you're not worthy, Esav. You can't have this. The evil one is not worthy that he should bring offerings to God. That's why, by the way, that the Gemara says that a Kohen who has killed a person, even accidentally, cannot do Birkat Kohanim. He can't deliver the priestly blessings. Most certainly he's disqualified from performing the Avodah in the Bet HaMikdash. So Esav was not qualified to perform any Avodah. Why? Because he was a murderer. How do I know he was a murderer? The Torah says very clearly, Vayavo Esav min hasadeh vehu ayef. On the day of the blessing, Esav came back from the field. He was exhausted. What was he exhausted of? He was exhausted from going out killing people. And therefore Yaakov concluded, this evil one is not worthy to bring the offerings to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's disqualified. And because of that inherent disqualification, Yaakov requested, you got to sell me the birthright. You need to sell me the firstborn rights. It's mine. In fact, there's a beautiful chidush by Rabbi Yonatan Eibschutz. He says that when Esav states, Vayomer Esav, Hine anochi holech lamut. After Yaakov requested the firstborn, Esav says, you know what, I feel like I'm going to die. Hine anochi holech lamut. Lama ze li bechora. Why do I need this firstborn anyways? And then he sold it to him. Rabbi Yonatan Eibschutz says that the statement of, behold, I'm going to die, really meant that Esav was going to go kill people. Esav wasn't really going to die. He knew he was going to die. He was young. He was fit. He was in his prime. What's his statement? He really meant that he wanted to kill people. Now, you're not going to publicly declare that you're going to kill people. That just doesn't make sense. Rather than stating outright that you're going to murder others, he preferred to say that he was going to die. So, and because I know that, so why do I need the firstborn? I know that I'm not fit for it. He was well aware that he's not qualified to perform the avodah. So the wicked Esav sold Yaakov Avinu the sacred birthright for some soup, some lentil soup and bread, because he was not capable of foregoing his craving to murder others. And his offspring and descendants in future generations inherited this character trait from him, to crave murder. It was specifically for that reason that they refused to accept the Torah. Because it says, Lo tirtzach, you shall not murder. It's one of the basic commandments. Like their great-great-great-grandfather Esav, they were incapable of forgiving the craving of murder. And that's what it says. It says, us? You want us to stop murdering? How can we stop murdering? The entire blessing that Yitzchak gave to Esav was Ve'al charbecha tichyeh, that you're going to live by the sword. This is who we are. It's in our blood. No pun intended. Literally, it's in their blood. They're murderers. They're evil people. So yeah, we can't accept this Torah if it says do not murder. So now everything makes sense over here. We can make sense what we learn. When Yitzchak was informed by Esav that he had sold the birthright to Yaakov, Yitzchak was relieved. And then he said, now I realize that I really did bless the right kid. I really blessed the legitimate firstborn. He shall also be blessed. He realized that Esav had relinquished his firstborn right to perform the avodah because he was incapable of foregoing the inclination to kill. So Yitzchak Avinu perceived through Ruach HaKodesh that Esav's descendants would refuse to accept the Torah because it says do not murder, because they also don't want to forego the desire to kill. So from the perspective of Esav and his children, the entire world would be in danger of returning to the state of Tohu Vavohu, the state of chaos and void, the state of Zuto Shel Yam, the bottom of the sea. The continued existence of the world was totally dependent upon the descendants of Yaakov, Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael, accepting the Torah, saving the world from the bottom of the sea. And by doing so, they're going to be deserving of all the beautiful things in this world. And that's why Yitzchak declared, he shall also be blessed. In other words, Yaakov and his descendants deserve all the brachot of this world as well. And this explains beautifully Yitzchak's remark to Esav, Ba achicha bemirma, vayikach birchatecha. Your brother came with cleverness and took your blessing. And the Midrash writes, Ba achicha bemirma, Rabbi Yochanan amar, Ba bechochmat torato. That he came with the wisdom of his Torah. Meaning what? This implies that Yaakov pointed out to Yitzchak the wisdom of his descendants' Torah. Meaning that they were destined to accept the Torah on Har Sinai, on Vav Sivan, and save the world from annihilation. And in that merit, Vayikach birchatecha, he took your blessing. And that will entitle them to also enjoy things here in this world. And this enlightens us to why God juxtaposed the warning related to Makat Bechorot, to the directive of having every man borrow from his fellow, every woman request from her fellow, silver vessels and gold vessels. Rabotai, the Egyptians were punished with Makat Bechorot for refusing to release Yisrael, God's firstborn, Beni Bechori Yisrael. By acknowledging the Jews as God's Bechor, it was evident that God endorsed the sale of the birthright to Yaakov on the grounds that Esav was incapable of abstaining from murder. And for this very same reason, Esav's descendants did not want to accept the Torah, in which it wrote, Lo tirtzach, don't kill. So by associating Makat Bechorot with the directive to request silver vessels and gold vessels from the fellow Egyptians, Bnei Israel would comprehend clearly why God employed that ambiguous term, Veishalu. Until they accepted the Torah, all of those vessels would remain in their possession as borrowed items. If, however, they accepted the Torah, thereby saving the entire world from Zuto Shel Yam, they would receive all the wealth of Mitzrayim, not as borrowed items, but as a gift. Matanot, not as a loan. And this was God's directive to Moshe, Daber na be'oznei ha'am, speak into the ears of the people. Let each man request of his fellow. That directive is emet. And this Torah's emet. Everything that God says is true and valid and endures forever. We merit the berachot of olam hazeh, of this world, only on condition that we accept the Torah. This is a vital lesson for all of Am Yisrael in every generation. There's not one of us that doesn't wish to enjoy the beauty and splendor that this world has to offer. I don't know, I haven't heard of anybody, maybe the great Kabbalist tzaddikim that don't want anything to do with whatsoever, maybe them, but most people, they want to enjoy what this world has to offer. If we wish to attain the abundant beracha related to matters of olam hazeh, it's so imperative that we accept upon ourselves the yoke of Torah, because it's through that yoke of the Torah, through our commitment to Torah and mitzvot, and gemilut chasadim, and matanat tzedakah, and all the great things that our Torah consists of. It's through that merit, that the world endures, that the world exists. And then the words of the pasuk actually become a reality. Orech yamim bimina, bismola osher vekavod. Length of days is at its right, its left, wealth and honor. They go hand in hand. The Torah and the wisdom on the right, osher vekavod on the left. They go hand in hand. They're connected with the body in between. With our physical is right here. This is what we have. We have our neshama, we have our hearts, we have our actions, and they go mamash hand in hand. That's one thing we have to understand. It's an amazing chidush. No, Bnei Israel did not steal any items. You know why? Because they went on Vav Sivan and they accepted the Torah. They accepted the Torah that Bnei Esav didn't want, thereby confirming that they are God's firstborn people, and hence the entire conversation, very cryptic, very secretive, was actually purely truth. Wishing everybody a wonderful night. Shabbat Shalom U'Barach.